My name is Eulalia Fenwick, and on Father's Day, my own father looked me straight in the eye and told me I wasn't welcome at his table. No shouting, no scene, just a cold dismissal in front of my entire family, as if I were a stranger trespassing on his backyard. The crowd laughed at his little jab about me babysitting trees, instead of building something real like my brother. I smiled tightly, nodded, and walked away. But inside, another fracture split wide open. I had spent a lifetime earning medals, leading men and women in crises, and protecting strangers I'd never meet. Yet in my father's eyes, all of that weighed less than a set of shiny house keys handed to my brother. That was the wound I carried as I drove off. The taste of smoke already in the air, not knowing that, by the very next day, it would be him, desperate, broken, begging me to answer his call. The drive back into Mountain Hollow took 2 hours, long enough for me to wonder why I'd even bothered. By the time I pulled up to my father's house, the backyard was already buzzing, kids chasing each other through the grass, the smoke of burgers curling up from the grill, neighbors lifting cold beers to their lips. My father, Lloyd Barnes, stood tall in the center, the self-appointed king of this little celebration, his voice booming as he raised a glass to my brother. "To Nate," he declared, pride swelling in every syllable, "for making Cedar Crest more than just a development. It's a legacy." The applause rolled across the yard like a wave, cheers rising as Nate grinned beside him, the golden sun basking in the glow of approval. Then my father's eyes slid to me. His smile narrowed, sharp enough to cut. "And my daughter," he added with a chuckle that wasn't warm at all. "Still babysitting the trees, I hear." A ripple of laughter followed from the guests, the kind of shallow amusement that digs deeper than outright cruelty. I felt the heat climb into my chest, but I kept my face steady, jaw locked. When the noise died down, my father stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough for only me to hear. "This day is for men who build legacies. You don't belong here. It's better if you leave." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The dismissal was heavier than any shout could have been. I gave a single nod, turned without a word, and slipped out past the chatter and the clinking glasses. The drive back toward town was quiet, the only sound the rush of hot wind as I cracked the window. It carried with it the faint, acrid scent of smoke, thin, almost hidden beneath the resin of pine. My gaze followed the ridgeline above Cedar Crest. There it was, a narrow thread of gray, rising straight into the sky. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Something in that fragile column of smoke told me the night wasn't done with me yet. Back at the ICP, set up in the Baptist church parking lot, I pulled on my yellow Nomex jacket and bent over the weather charts. Radios crackled and clipped codes all around me, the language of a world where orders weren't questioned and hesitation wasn't an option. Here, I wasn't the child dismissed at a barbecue. Here, I was the incident commander, and every set of eyes in the room waited for my call. On the main screen, a red icon flashed where the fire had been spotted, just north of Cedar Crest. At first glance, it looked like any ignition. One more flare-up in a hot, dry summer. But the attached footage told another story. A homeowner's door camera had captured the exact moment a firework veered off course, hissing into the hillside. The man holding it was no stranger. He was one of my father's marketing partners, the same people he'd toasted with just hours earlier. The fire wasn't random. It had been born out of the very celebration meant to glorify my father's development. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady over the radio. "Ops, copy. Send Division Zulu to the north side of Cedar Crest. This is IC." Within the hour, the sheriff's voice echoed through the command post, confirming a Level 2 evacuation for Cedar Crest. Residents were told to pack up and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. CAL FIRE, the county crews, and I huddled over the map, the wind readings only making the news worse. A southwest push meant flames could ride the canyon straight into the subdivision in less than 3 hours. I traced a line with my finger and spoke without hesitation. "We need a dozer line here. Cut through the model homes." The room went still. A representative from my father's company, a lawyer I'd seen too many times, snapped back immediately. "Absolutely not. Those homes are the flagship of Cedar Crest." I didn't answer him. Instead, the safety officer slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were permits, stamped and signed, showing that my father had filed for exemptions on fire safety spacing to speed construction. The photographs didn't lie. Yards packed with ornamental trees, decks pressed too close together, piles of scrap lumber stacked behind fences. The truth hit like a fist. Cedar Crest wasn't a community. It was kindling dressed up as luxury. A siren wailed outside. The dispatcher's voice came through the radio. "Barnes Ridge fire, now 500 acres. Moving fast." I picked up the pen, signed the order to open the line, and pressed it flat to the table. The signature was firm, decisive. I knew in that moment the fight was no longer just about protocol or job titles. This was survival. For a town that hadn't asked for my father's shortcuts, for neighbors who trusted us to hold the line. And I was the one who would make sure we did. Inside the ICP, the situation map bled red. The fire had surged past 1,500 acres when the radio snapped. "I see! Fire spotting over Barnes Draw." Ops followed a beat later. Voice tight. The downdraft was pulling flame down the canyon like a natural chimney. It wasn't a brush fire anymore. Dispatch labeled it Barnes Ridge Fire. Every time the name crackled through the speakers, it felt like my family history being fed into the blaze. My phone vibrated across the table, again and again, my father's name filling the screen. I silenced it and leaned closer to the intel board. Twist came fast. Safety reported a scrap wood dump stacked behind fences near Cedar Crest, left by a subcontractor. Dry as tinder. In this heat, it might as well be a crate of Roman candles. Aerial recon added another gut punch. A dozer cut from the project had carved a wind corridor, a funnel that was now accelerating the fire straight at the subdivision. Human shortcuts had become a weaponized breeze. There wasn't time for speeches or permission slips. I signed the order and said it out loud so everyone heard it the same way. "Prepare ignition. We burn out at the model homes." At the perimeter, my father slammed both hands against the sawhorse barricade, voice shredded raw. "You're burning my life's work." I kept my eyes on the map and the radio keyed. "Hold the line. Human lives first." The igniters nodded, masks down, and moved. The torches hissed. Flame crept along eaves and decks, then roared up the facades of Cedar Crest's showpieces. The backburn took shape, a clean black line that could starve the main front when it arrived. I stood squared to the wind, pulse loud in my ears. Knowing this wasn't just a tactic, it was a cut straight through a man's pride. Ops broke in, urgent. "I see. We've got 2 holdouts, your mother and Mr. Willett. Downed tree blocks their street. No egress." I gripped the mic. "Sheriff, mandatory evacuation. Force them out." Static then. "I see. We can't reach them in time." Air attack rolled on top of that with a harder truth. "Medivac possible, but smoke's a brick wall. 2 options. Wait on a wind shift and gamble, or burn deeper to open a window." Burn deeper meant sacrificing more homes. I looked at the topo, at the canyon, at the hard black we'd gained, and chose. Zulu Division, burn deeper. Open that window. The igniters pivoted without a question. Beyond the fence, my father went silent, watching his tract disappear into a boiling gray. I set the phone face down and braced into the heat. We were trading architecture for air, square footage for a corridor of sky. Enough for a helicopter to find 2 human beings and lift them out alive. The medevac dropped into the corridor we'd burned open, rotors beating smoke into a furious whirl. "Zulu, keep pushing," I ordered. Eyes fixed on the map as the model homes, my father's trophies, went up like matchsticks. At the fence line, he thrashed against the barricade, voice shredded. "You're destroying everything I built!" I didn't look up. I tracked wind, slope, timing. The helicopter lifted with two silhouettes inside, my mother and Mr. Willett, tiny against the gray, and only then did my chest loosen enough to breathe. Ops came through. One firefighter burned, en route to med unit. I stepped into the trailer, gripped his shoulder. "You held the line. I'll take it from here." When I returned, PIO was waiting. Pale. Local media had my father on camera, screaming that I was a traitor. The clip was already ricocheting online. I set the phone face down and listened as Ops delivered the next hit. The fire had split, a spur racing for the neighborhood we'd just evacuated, and another angling toward Highway 71. If the highway went, so did the town. "Copy," I said. "Prep contingency. We'll build for the worst." By dawn, the smoke had thinned to a bitter haze. My phone buzzed until it shook the desk. Dad. Over and over. 88 missed calls in 12 hours. I answered. His voice was sandpaper. "The sprinklers in Cedar Crest. They're shells. I cut the reel system to save money. They don't work." The room tilted and steadied. "Then listen carefully," I said. "Leave the area now. Sheriff will escort you out." "That's an order." The radio cut across his ragged breathing. "I see. Highway 71 is compromised. If we lose it, Mountain Hollow is gone." Every route, every life, hinged on that strip of asphalt. I looked at the map, at the last unburned blocks of my father's development, and knew what had to happen. "We anchor the final line on Cedar Crest," I told Ops. "All remaining structures are expendable." On the phone, my father sobbed like a man finally out of lies. I closed my eyes, inhaled smoke and resolve. "Mission first," I said. "Execute the line." Night fell heavy over Mountain Hollow. The sky painted in a furious red glow that made the town feel like it was sitting on the lip of hell. Inside the ICP, Ops and I hunched over the topo maps, tracing the last possible defense. This was it, the line that would decide whether Mountain Hollow stood or burned. The radio keened with static and urgency. "I see. Flame lengths 80 feet, moving fast." I keyed my mic, my voice calm but absolute. "Zulu Division, ignition on my mark." Out on the ridge, the igniters raised their torches. One by one, they dropped fire into the grass. Tiny orange tongues crawled, then roared, racing along the line we'd drawn, consuming the last intact homes of Cedar Crest. They didn't look like luxury anymore. They looked like tinder, giving themselves up to buy time for a town that had no idea how close it had come. The backburn rose to meet the inferno. I pressed the radio tight against my ear, every nerve tuned to the reports. "Hold the line," I repeated, steady and relentless. My father's voice was nowhere now, drowned out by the crackle and roar. At the barricade, he stood frozen, eyes hollow, watching 10 years of his empire collapse into black ash. Beyond him, though, I could see the outline of Mountain Hollow, the white steeple of the church, the school roof catching the glow, the silhouettes of families packed into shelters. They were what this was for. That, I reminded myself, was the legacy that mattered. The fire line thundered, flame leapt high, searing the night, then hit the black. The backburn swallowed the oxygen, starved the front. It clawed forward, then staggered, then withered. In the radio silence that followed, you could almost hear the fire sigh as it gave up. I dropped to the ground outside the trailer, legs folding without thought. My Nomex reeked of smoke, my arms streaked with soot, my hair stiff with ash. Sweat cut through the grime, dripping into the dust, for the first time in 3 days. I let the breath out of my lungs and didn't pull it back in with a tremor. Ops crouched beside me, offering a canteen. I drank, then leaned my head against the concrete step. The town still stood. Mountain Hollow still had its homes, its church, its school. We had held the line. I glanced across the field one last time. My father hadn't moved. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a man who had gambled with shortcuts and pride, left with nothing but smoke curling around his silhouette. We had won, but the cost was his legacy reduced to rubble, and my certainty that nothing between us would ever be the same. Weeks later, the smell of char still lingered in the air whenever the wind came off the ridge, but in the county administration building, the scent was floor wax and nerves. The hearing chamber was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls, reporters setting up tripods, camera lights blinking red. This wasn't just another meeting. This was Judgment Day for Cedar Crest, for the Barnes name, and for the man who had built both. The fire investigator stood at the lectern first. His voice was steady, factual, merciless. Cause of ignition: fireworks discharged during a marketing event hosted by Barnes Development. Contributing factors: waiver of fire safety spacing granted under expedited permitting. Stockpiles of untreated scrap lumber left on site by subcontractors. Outcome: Cedar Crest created conditions equivalent to a tinderbox. Once ignited, the spread was inevitable. The words didn't need embellishment. They were blunt enough to make the room feel heavier with each bullet point. Murmurs swelled, neighbors exchanging glances, some shaking their heads, others clutching papers in their laps, as though holding on to proof they hadn't been crazy to worry. Then it was my father's turn. He rose from his seat slowly, the confidence he wore like armor gone. No crisp suit, no booming voice. Just a man who looked older than I'd ever seen him. He walked to the podium, as if every step cost him something. The chamber stilled. Even the reporters stopped adjusting their equipment. He gripped the sides of the lectern, knuckles white. His eyes searched the crowd, then dropped to the notes in front of him. When he spoke, his voice cracked on the second word. I put profit above safety. I cut corners. I pushed timelines. I told myself it was business, but it was arrogance. He swallowed, and for the first time I saw him tremble. And because of me, this town suffered. Families were forced to flee. Firefighters were hurt. My daughter— His voice faltered, broke off. He steadied himself and continued. I'm sorry. I apologize to Mountain Hollow. The silence that followed was absolute, as if the whole room had to decide whether to breathe again. For decades he had filled rooms with his voice. Now the weight came from what he couldn't say. From the back row, I kept still. I didn't rise, didn't move toward him. This wasn't my fight to finish. I had faced fire with my chain of command. Now he had to face this one with his. The county chair leaned forward. Mr. Barnes, restitution will be required. What measures do you propose? My father cleared his throat. Voice small but audible. I'll use my personal assets to establish a Firewise fund. It will pay for defensible space, for sprinkler systems, for retrofits in homes that need it most, low-income families, veterans. Cedar Crest will be rebuilt, but it will meet every standard this time. A vote was called. Hands went up across the dais. Unanimous. Cedar Crest would not escape oversight. It would be rebuilt, but under a watchful eye, stripped of shortcuts. As the gavel struck, I leaned back, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My father's empire had been humbled, not by me, not even by the flames, but by accountability in the clear light of day. For once, he wasn't the man at the center of applause. He was the man standing alone, forced to admit what everyone else already knew. I didn't feel triumph, only a quiet release. The chain of command had shifted, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't mine to carry. Late in the afternoon, the office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. Through the wide window, the ridge stretched across the horizon, blackened and raw, a scar stitched into the mountain. It would be years before the green returned, but even now I could imagine it. Saplings rising out of ash, life pushing through what had been lost. My phone buzzed on the desk, the vibration sharp against the silence. The screen lit up with a single word. Dad. For a moment I let it ring, the sound echoing like a question I'd avoided all my life. Then I pressed accept. His voice came through, cracked and uncertain. I want you home for Father's Day next year. Just that. No speeches, no bravado. The man who once boomed above a crowd sounded small, almost hollow. My eyes shifted to the wall where the map of the Barnes Ridge fire was pinned. The final line we'd burned was still traced in thick black marker, a reminder of the night we saved the town and lost everything else. I stared at it as I answered, calm and steady. I'll always protect this town, but as for us, that takes time, and it takes real change. There was silence on the line, no argument, no retort, only breathing. I ended the call, set the phone down, and leaned back into the chair. Outside, the smoke was finally lifting. The sky above Mountain Hollow glowed blue again, wide and clean. The scar across the ridge would never vanish, but it would soften, and new growth would find its way through. So would I. The fire had burned away more than cedar and pine. It had cut a boundary I had needed for years, a boundary I would not cross again. For the first time, I felt free, not because my father had welcomed me back, but because I no longer needed his welcome at all.